Ladies and gentlemen, ATDF everything in that shelf presentation. You're now rocking with TDF everything. Spoiled rotten.
Spoiler alert.
Welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
It's me, Daniel.
And it's Sick Ben.
Oh, what's going on, Sick Ben?
I don't know, but where are we at right now, Daniel?
Oh man,
We're on
this is spoiled rotten.
and yeah, on that shelf. Yeah,
Excellent.
we did it.
Excellent.
Recovery.
We did it.
Just to our listeners right now, I think recovering from something. Not sure if it's the COVID or just a regular cold or whatever, but that's why my voice sounds like this today. It's not a special guest star. We don't have that kind of budget.
No, you wanted to do something special for the first episode of the year. So
I definitely wanted to do that, and
you wanted to recover from a sickness.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it seems apropos based on this show that we're about to talk about. We're not talking to the show. We are just going to talk about it.
We are going to talk about it, and I am really, really excited to talk about this because, of course, I played the game. I didn't finish the game, full disclosure, but I'm very curious to see.
Neither did I, by the way. I think I played the first episode, but what we are talking about, so that no one gets any anxiety, is The Last of Us, episode 1. If you're alone in the dark, is that what that is? That's
I believe so. Yeah,
episode is called.
Yeah, something like that.
No way to look it up. Yeah. Well, you know what? I think before we get into the spoilers and everything, this is kind of like new territory for us. But would you say if you didn't have to cover this for this podcast, is this episode enough for you to want to keep going?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, me too.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things that this episode had to overcome was the dreaded issues with video game to movie translations, right? We have a lot of bad tastes, a lot of sour tastes in our mouths. There hasn't been a lot of good adaptations. The best so far would have been The Witcher, but then even video game people are like, that's deviating too far away from the source material, so they're not a fan of it. Here, we're going to talk about that, obviously, but so far, I'm damned impressed by, like, there's certain things that they do in the shooting, the production, all that kind of stuff that hint at it being a video game movie, but doesn't pull you out of it to be like, hey, this was a video game beforehand. You know what I mean? It's really, really cool. I really appreciate what they've done. And it really is, I think, really, really a testament that the game's director and creator is co-creating this or co-writing it.
Yeah. Who's that? Neil Druckmann?
Druckmann, yeah, that's it. Can't believe I didn't say the name. But yeah,
yeah. So it's if you could just look this out, the guy from Chernobyl was like Chris something.
Yep.
Do you have his name up?
Hold on. Man.
It's Craig Mazin, and Neil Druckmann wrote this first episode, and I believe Craig Mazin's kind of like the showrunner of this. So he did Chernobyl, as I mentioned earlier, and I feel like you can definitely see how Chernobyl and this come together in someone's head that wants to create stuff. And so yeah, I think right away it was very interesting to have the setting be the 60s, and it's like that talk show. It's got the brother from The Mummy and the cop
like that guy.
The cop from Peacemaker that we thought was really weird. And they're like talking heads on this show. And I thought that was really good. I know that's not from the video game. I feel like we can dispense of like, oh, this was in the video game, this wasn't, like, just and kind of just stick to what we saw, unless it's gonna illuminate something. But yeah, this is obviously made for the show, and I thought it was a very good way of like setting the dread in Like you know what this is going to be about,
Yeah.
and there was just uh, a lot of visuals of, especially when I don't know the character's name, but the actor's name is John Hannah, when he's talking about like what happens when the fungus takes over, and now you've got
Hmm.
like billions of people being controlled and with one goal of spread, and like the looks on people's faces looked like they had already been taken over. It didn't even look like they were like scared. I was
Hmm.
just like, this is just, I feel like the show in long form and in very quick succession is a lot of setup and payoff,
Hmm.
which works for me, obviously. Doesn't leave you being like, wait, what? It kind of just, anything that is set up realistically is paid off, and
Hmm.
I feel like that makes it better for viewing instead of having it be a complete mystery box.
Yeah. And I think this scene, the opening scene with the talking heads that you're talking about right now, I think it does something very, very specific to the audience that I don't think anyone has captured, or this, at least this is my idea, right? The fact that this is a video game adaptation means that, yeah, we know the story beats and all that kind of stuff. So the interesting thing to me is that every zombie movie subverts or just kind of reverse engineers how the whole thing started, right? The idea that the show is being like, listen, you look, the story's already out there. It's not new. So we're just going to explain, and we're going to be on brand and explain how this like fungal infection got to the way it is by this scene. And I thought that was just such a wonderful, wonderful way of being like, hey, we get that you know the story already, the majority of the people watching this, right? Because one can be, we can assume that the majority of the people watching this are Last of Us fans, right? So for them to do
I
that,
would make that assumption, but yeah,
well, okay, let's
I
say
think
a
it's an HBO
significant,
show, right? Like
sure,
people watch HBO.
okay, fair enough, but I think that scene in particular was saying something to be like, okay, this is how we're going to explain the whole thing, and we're going to just like really turn everything up on its head because you already know the story of what happens to Joel and Ellie. And I'm like, that's brilliant to me. It's wildly wonderful.
Yeah, I didn't see it that way, but I mean that is an interesting take, because I think what they were trying to do was differentiate from COVID. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
very acutely aware of when this is coming out for
Mm-hmm.
people, and to straight up be like, well, yeah,
Worse,
like
worse.
viral spreads, and he's like, yeah, we lose a couple million and then we win. This was being like, this isn't COVID. Like we're not. This isn't what we're talking about. This is
Mm-hmm.
something completely different, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why this has stakes, and this is why you're going to be interested as opposed to watching another replacement for COVID story. I think that's more
Right.
what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
Um, because I think a lot more people than you think are like us, and they're in that they're like, I know that game. I think I played some of it. I didn't finish it, and
Mm.
I think so. They're aware of it, but um, I'm not saying that every diehard The Last of Us person isn't watching. I just don't think they outnumber the amount of people who aren't diehards watching.
That's fair. I don't have that data.
Yeah,
That's
I
fair. That's you're fair to call me out on that assumption. But um, yeah, it's it's just wild to be for the like that. That's the way I saw that opening scene is the showrunners being like, hey, yeah, we get it. You know what's going on. So we're gonna tell you everything here too, and then you're gonna enjoy the ride because like right away from that opening scene, I was gripped. I was
yeah,
so gripped, even though it was a talking head thing. I was gripped. It was great.
it was well done.
Mhm.
I think the next great thing they do is they knock the Sarah character out of the park. Like
Oh
I
God,
found
yeah.
that like that is one thing where you're kind of like, if you know anything, you know she's going to die.
Yep.
So I think they did a good job of taking their time with her,
Mm-hmm.
and you like, as someone who's played the beginning of this video game twice now, just
Mm-hmm.
thinking like maybe I'll get past this beginning part. Um, like it's the part I knew. That was the part that I was like, all right, like we're gonna do this, and right away I'm like, oh wow, they're doing so much more with her. So you just
Mm-hmm.
forget about what you know for a bit while you watch her
Mm-hmm.
at school, while you watch her with the neighbors. Um, you just get a sense of her life, and I what I liked a lot watching the second time around was just how wild things were outside of her. Like she'd be honing in like at the
Mhm.
store where she got her father's watch fixed.
Mhm.
And like cars are like zooming. I know it's like police cars and stuff, but like it was just like stuff that would make me turn my head. And she's just so focused in and not engaging with what's happening. And then throughout her section of the show, there's explosions going off. Like she watches like fighter jets fly in, and she's just kind of like, "Huh, all right," and
Yeah.
keeps going. And I thought that was a very interesting juxtaposition of how serene she was while in the like midst of chaos and like
Mhm.
at least aggressiveness.
Because I really thought there was a purpose done for that, right? To
Hmm.
build up the character, to make it that scene hurt even more. Which, by the way, that acting for a death scene, incredible.
Hmm.
Um, I thought it was the idea of really building up the innocence of the character of Sarah, right? The idea of like everything's going on around her and it doesn't even affect her. She's just innocently doing the thing that her heart tells her to do, right? Go into the house, check up on the old lady. What's going on? Where's that big crash coming from? All those things kind of like do not even cross her mind to be like, maybe I should stay inside and listen to the public service announcement that's on
Yeah. Okay.
TV.
So before we get to that, why?
Yeah.
So there's the conceit is it's her dad's birthday. It's
Mhm.
Joel, sorry, Joel's
Joel.
birthday. He's by all counts the main character so far, and his daughter Sarah is going to like try and celebrate his birthday, but kind of like at every step he's undercutting her efforts. Like there's no pancake mix for her to make
Mhm.
birthday pancakes. He doesn't bring the cake home. He takes a double shift so that they can't actually celebrate.
Mhm.
Um he even tries to pawn her off on the neighbors when they're leaving. Like
Yep.
just all these instances of him being like, yeah, whatever. Um and so I mean it was this interesting thing because at no point do I doubt her love for her father or
Mhm.
her father's love for her, but it was just they didn't try and play it up like these two like they're the best. Like, there's no issues there. It's like yeah, like
Mhm.
she probably feels like she would like more time with her dad,
Mhm.
especially on her birthday, or the fact that she wanted to make pancakes and he's like, I don't even like pancakes.
Mhm.
Um, I thought that was interesting to show like an actual lived-in relationship instead of
Mhm.
just like the surface level stuff that you would see in other things.
Yeah. And I do agree with that point because it's like a lot of people are like, okay, and the scenes that we're going to talk about next is like, oh, that's how far removed he is from the person he was. I'm like, was he though? Because there's not a lot of, like you said, you're hoping for more of that father daughter thing where it's like, oh crap, I can't believe I had to take this. I wanted to be with you. I wanted to celebrate with you. I wanted to just like, do that kind of stuff. And like, he's just really leaning in too much into the I'm not available on my birthday
Hmm.
shtick and all that kind of stuff. And it does suck a little bit. And I get why he's like that, right? Because he shows up for her. And that's what it is. He's doing everything for her, the
Yeah.
acts of service, work, and all that kind of stuff. And even like she points it out later on, it's like, yeah, your watch, I got it. I got it fixed with your money because you never would have done it for yourself.
Yeah.
So we kind of just get the impression of, oh, this is a guy that doesn't take care of himself and just only worries about others. Like that's the impression I get right from that. But it's
Yeah. And I
not a lot of
think
showing the father and daughter relationship that I wanted to.
so there's a podcast that I'm sure
Mhm.
everyone will quote as they cover this first episode. We're probably the last people to cover this way. Like
Mhm.
the podcast is actually hosted by the voice of Joel from the video games, Troy Baker, and
Awesome.
he did a interview with, I believe this was Chris Mazin, and basically Chris was talking about, and I don't I know if people listen to the show they know that I like to be like this is the thing that they're exploring. I don't know if this is the whole thing because it doesn't
Mhm.
fully track for me, but there are definitely things in this episode that track, which is they wanted to take a look at love and specifically the negative aspects of it. Like there is a way
Mhm.
that love can harm as well. Like it's not all completely nurturing. And
Mhm.
um I think for me anyway, the first like real shining a light on that is when Uncle Tommy shows up and Sarah, like as a joke, is like, "Oh, he loves you," and Joel is like, "Well, he's dependent on me," and she's like, "I don't." That's the same thing,
Mhm.
and just that kind of like he doesn't see that as love. It might not even be. Well, it is something that's dragging him away from
Mhm.
his daughter at the very least.
Mhm.
Um, and then obviously there's the example later on, like there's the Sarah example, there's the Ellie example of later
Yep.
on of love that we'll get to. But I thought like that was an interesting thing to rewatch the episode with, that framing of this was an intent of the show's creators, was to really take a look at ways love can create negativity.
And I love that. I really, really do, because you see everything set up. And we'll talk about that scene later on where you really do see the toxic aspect of love being established right there, right? But like, yeah, this is very much a toxic aspect of love. If you look at Joel, he loves everyone else. Well, okay, I'm not going to say his brother because that's not accurate right now. We're just going to say Sarah.
Yeah,
The
he
fact
loves
that,
Sarah.
yeah. So the fact that he loves her, and that's not questioned, but he won't take care of himself, is toxic in its own regard. Like, that's toxic love being expressed at a very like low key minimal level that people accept, right?
Mhm.
But as the show progresses, there's way more toxicity and in so many different elements of it. I'm like, this is
Well,
awesome. This
I
is
mean,
great if that's what they were
even
going for.
even like the truck scene for me is another like.
Mhm.
So before we get to the truck scene, because I do want to talk about her
Mhm.
checking in on the neighbors, because it is quite baffling to me. But so they, even the concept that she has to go over there, I might have missed a line of dog. I don't understand what the hold they have on her is. Like, because it was like, hey, like, what's her face said she hadn't seen you in a while. Why aren't you coming over? I'm like, does she need to? Like, I don't know who these people are other than their neighbors. And I know I get that that speaks to my relationship with my neighbors, but like, I was
Mhm.
just kind of like, I don't know, can't you just be like hello and that's it? Doesn't really seem like you need to be there.
Yep.
But I don't. Yeah, I'm sure if someone was paying attention better than me, they'll know that what what that hold they have on her is, other than maybe
Mhm.
it's just supposed to be a nice southern thing to.
Yeah, it just
uh
seems like guilt. It just seems like I'm going to guilt you to spend time with my non-communicative mom, but really it's for me.
yeah, well, yeah, she gets to have a daughter type thing going on
Yeah.
where she's like, I made you cookies, and it's not the kind of cookies that she likes. Doesn't matter if she did the
Mhm.
same thing to her dad, but anyway, like so that is set up that like she needs to go over there, and you get your first look at the, as you said,
Mhm.
the almost catatonic um older woman
Mhm.
who's being fed the biscuits. She's not really eating it. She looks like she's kind of like spitting it back up.
Yep.
And then she has her school day. She goes and she gets the watch fixed. As I said, you see a bunch of chaotic things happening around her during this process. And then she goes over, and that was the cookie thing, and you kind of you get to see her raid their like video collection
Mhm.
for, and I know this is a reference to the video game, but
Yeah.
like
It's a
she
reference to
gets,
the second one too, which is like
yeah,
deep,
well, it's, I know
deep
it's
cut.
like DLC or something like that, but it
It
might
is. Yeah.
it's, yeah, it's not even in the game proper, but yeah. So you find out that one of Joel's favorite movies is the name she says, something something too, and
Mhm.
she takes that with her, but not before us seeing basically what it must look like as the fungus initially takes over.
Mhm.
I think in the school you kind of see someone's hand twitching, which is like an early
Yep.
sign. You hear a cough,
Mhm.
but this looks like, oh, the fungus has fully taken over. Like the way she's moved, the older woman is moving her body and her mouth. It looks
Mhm.
like, okay, that's what that looks like. That's what
Mhm.
that is. And so she goes home. Um, they
Also
have
important
a,
to, sorry to interrupt, but also important to point out the dog in this.
yeah, I was gonna get to the
Yeah.
dog later, but yes, the
Mhm.
dog is, they have a dog
Mhm.
named Mercy.
And
Um,
Mercy is very not cool with what's happening with the old lady. Mercy
yeah,
knows. Yeah.
Mercy does
Mhm.
know. So then she gets home again. The dad comes at 10 instead of 9 when he said he was gonna come home.
Mhm.
She falls asleep. He gets a call to go pick up the brother, who has obviously dealt with someone who has been taken over by the fungus, because
Mhm.
he's like, some guy just started swinging on the waitress. I took care of it. I'm in jail now. You have to come get me. Otherwise, I'm in here all weekend.
Mhm.
I mean, it's annoying, but fair enough. He's got to
Mhm.
go. Uh, and then that's when Sarah wakes up to the loud noises and she goes into the house. And I felt like, uh, as a black person, I feel like anyone should do this, but as a black person, I'm not going to go into a white person's house in this
Yep.
situation
Mhm.
and risk anything. Like, I think that the safest thing for her to do is to go get help from somebody.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna say call the cops, but get someone to help. Like, even call your dad and be like, "Hey, something's up. Like, you need to come back now."
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, just the idea that she went in there even after stepping in the blood. I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
know. Like, I don't. I get it's. I guess what I'm bumping up against is in general my whole not love for horror, because certain things just have to happen to create the atmosphere.
Yep.
Because realistically, the chase could have happened before she went into the house. Like, she didn't need to go in. They
Mhm.
were just trying to create a mood, and I'm acknowledging that, and I'm not going to harp on it. But it was just,
Mhm.
for me, I was just like, I don't. I feel like she's obviously half black, and even if she wasn't, her dad isn't white.
Mhm.
Just there's so too many things in a Texan town that makes me be like, I don't know that you want to be going into a white person's home where they're bleeding out.
Mhm.
Um,
Uninvited too,
yeah,
because then you're
and then
technically an
just being
intruder.
there
Yeah. I
without calling for some form of backup or someone to come help you.
Oh, I completely agree with you on that. Like, it's just one of those things where I'm like, this is what's taking me out of the show right now, is the fact that a person of color is unaware of all those different factors. And also, hey, we're gonna step in blood. And sure, you could be like, it's dark. We didn't know it was blood. She didn't see it was red. Okay, fair. But then how is it that she opens the room, the grandma's doing the thing to the woman, and then the husband, like the son or the husband guy, is like over there in the corner being like, oh look, she did her over there. And like, how does she miss that? Like, that's my thing from the visual accessibility standpoint.
By that point, she hasn't missed anything. She missed
Mm-hmm.
the fact that the grandmother wasn't in the wheelchair anymore, and it's not like it was tipped over, so it's
Mm-hmm.
not like the grandmother like got knocked over and fell out of
Mm-hmm.
it. It's still up. She missed that, but I do think that throughout the episode, but throughout that day, she was missing a bunch of stuff. Like,
Oh,
she just was in
100%.
her own world.
Yeah.
I don't know if that really tracks in a situation where she purposely went in there to see what was wrong, but
True.
maybe they thought that that was kind of, as I said, there is a bunch of setup and payoff of like setting up that she's not the most observant person until
Mm-hmm.
she is,
Mm-hmm.
like when she honed in on the bracelet that was reflecting on her face and she noticed the person twitching, or at least
Mm-hmm.
we did. But throughout the episode, she is just ignoring or not really in the same world as a bunch of stuff that would draw people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
um I just thought, like, so it wasn't to be like, hey, how come you're ignoring all the danger signs once you're in there? It was more like, why would you even think going in there was a good idea without
Yeah.
some form of like, hey, even if you're calling the cops to be like, hey, there was a disturbance at my neighbor's house. I'm gonna go in and check. Do not come in guns a blazing, please.
Mm-hmm.
Like, um,
So, you know what the funny thing is? I think you raise an interesting point here, because the people that are really, really wrongfully, stupidly upset about a racial casting choice here, the point of this character's actions would have made more sense if it was a white girl. Like, that is 100% true, right? If you look at horror and all those kind of things, like, that's what happens first. Is like, yeah,
yeah,
there's a stupid privileged white girl that's like, oh, nothing possibly could go wrong. I'm going to help everyone because nothing's going to happen to me. Like, that's the energy she came in there with. And then
yes.
I'm like, that is one thing to pick at with the race swapping thing for this character. But
I
other
mean,
than
it's
that,
not
really,
like there are people of color who don't ignore that stuff either. Like, I don't
completely
know.
agree.
Yeah, that
But
part I wouldn't really pick at.
but
I just,
right, but you bringing it up that it's in Texas in a white person's house, in entering
yeah, and
without being invited.
all I'm
Those are
saying
very
is
legitimate things.
all I'm saying is it happened without much commentary on it. So even if the commentary was, hey, this is the ills of thinking that you're one of
Mhm.
them, that would be one thing. Like
Mm.
she went in there thinking, well, they're my neighbors. I always go over there. Who cares? Like, and then something happens to remind her, like, you'll never actually be seen as one of them. That's
Mhm.
one thing, but it didn't, so it stuck out to me.
Yeah.
That is more what I'm getting at. Is it
Yeah.
was a place where I bumped up against the content,
Yeah.
but that isn't to say every black person would react the way I would. That's just to say that
Right.
it would be something they would have to reckon with if they thought of it ahead of time or once
Mhm.
they were actually in the situation.
Yeah, you're right. It absolutely does raise an eyebrow because it's like that scene in Blade where he just like beats up a cop in the middle
Yeah.
of Brooklyn in the daylight. You're like, who thought about this? Like that would never happen.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. That was, and when we talked about things like Black Panther, it was like
Mhm.
that's why most people are saying this was the first black superhero because
Right.
things like that happen in Blade where his race doesn't really factor in until it's used as like a jab by the white villain. Like it's
Right.
not he's able to assault a cop, and I'm not saying I felt bad for the cop, but he's able to beat the shit out of a cop in broad daylight and act like when he gets shot, like what's wrong with you guys? Like you guys are
Mhm.
idiots. So it wasn't written with a black person's mentality
Mhm.
in mind. That's whatever. And
Mhm.
all I'm saying is for this is those are moments that happen pretty quickly, whereas this is drawn out on purpose because they need a certain atmosphere to be created.
Mhm.
Even the point of like how long she watches that thing dangle out of the grandmother's mouth and the time it takes
Mhm.
for the grandmother to get up. It feels like a lot of time is passing without her being like, "Hey, I'm in danger right now." Like it's
Oh, I
just a lot of,
agree.
and sure, she could be frozen in fear. I'm just saying all of that still gave me enough time to really think about it and be like,
Mhm.
why is this taking so long? Or why are we dwelling on this if there's no real commentary going to be made on it,
Mhm. Mhm. I
given who
agree.
you have
Yeah,
casted?
I agree because like the first when she went in there, I'm like, now I see a problem with the racial casting because this is something I would expect a white character woman to do in this scene. And in every horror movie trope, it literally does happen like that, right? So, yeah, yeah. I mean, you bring it up as a good point. Me questioning it, being like, "What? What?" It like the first time watching it through, I agree with you on that. That is a slight knock against this show right now.
So then Joel and Uncle Tommy come back,
Mhm.
and this is the other instance of the different kinds of love. So again, we already know Sarah loves Joel. There's no question about that. But when he saves her from the grandmother attacking, she looks upset. I mean, and I'm not saying like how what's wrong with her. Like obviously watching someone's face get bashed in would be an issue.
Mhm.
Um you wouldn't really just be able to recover from that very quickly. Um so I
Mhm.
that sets up a moment later on that I think everyone has also been talking about already with Ellie, but that
Mhm.
is like her love for him doesn't blind her to the violence that he's capable of, and that
Mhm.
she doesn't see that as a good thing because when she went to go get the money to fix his watch, she kind of fixates on this knife he's got that
Mhm.
doesn't really look like it was used for non-violent uses. So yeah, I think again there's a bit of setup of like, right, like that's there is that violent part of my dad, and then
Mhm.
seeing it play out in front of you, you're
Mhm.
kind of like, as someone who sympathizes with Sarah, you're like, ah, yeah, I can see how that's an issue.
Mhm.
But they do get in their car, and I think in Joel's effort to protect his daughter, and I do believe his brother as well,
Mhm.
he's making some callous decisions about not only are we not going to pick people up, which I
Mhm.
understand in this
Mhm.
situation, he's like,
Yes.
run them over, just run them over. What are you doing? Just like,
Yeah.
and I get that at a certain point it would be hard to avoid everybody, but
Mhm.
it is still talking. If we are looking at it through that frame of some of the negativity that can come with claiming that you love something and how you love it,
Yes. Mhm.
you can justify decisions like, well, we're going to kill these people because
Mhm.
they're in the way of us being safe and
Mhm.
protecting what I love.
Mhm.
So yeah, I thought that was well layered into the show as well,
Mhm.
and it it ends in their car crashing and Sarah and Joel being shot by a soldier. and it wasn't by accident. It was like he shot them because he was told, like, you got to kill them, because basically at this point they are trying to contain this outbreak by killing. And
it's important to note too that because she's like, oh, she twisted her ankle and
she
then
can't
like
run.
she can't run, and they obviously thought, oh, they're lying about this, so we're just going to kill them both. I don't know if she was walking, if they would have been played out differently. That's not the point, because the video game, like, and the important thing to point out right now, the scene that Joel and Sarah were watching a movie and all that kind of stuff, that's lifted, like the cinematic is basically lifted in dialogue entirely from the game. So is that whole car sequence. And this is where I'm like, this is where I feel like the video game side of things works really, really well. However, this is a pivotal point in video games to me where the story structure and cinematics started becoming more movie-like, right? So to me, these video game adaptations after a certain era, I would say the Uncharted era, became fundamentally easier to translate into this because that cinematography and all that kind of stuff had already been considered, and not as a gimmick that most other kind of video game movies had to bring into the shoot from a camera standpoint or something like that didn't connect. This is one of those things where it's just like, oh, because the cinematic in the game was so movie-like already, it translates very, very well. And all we really need to do is make sure the set's there and everything is true to the cinematic. The one thing that they did change, and I'm very curious about this, is the owner of the farm that they set on fire. Like they already
addressed it on New Rockstars. It's probably just someone who works on the production that got their name on it.
Oh, okay. I was really genuinely hoping that's something later down the road, but if it's just an Easter egg for someone that's, had a birthday on set, good for them. I like that.
I don't think it's that deep.
Right.
Yeah, I think to answer your question about if she was walking, I think the fact that the soldier initially had to shoot down, I don't know what they're going to call that character. He certainly looked like a runner, but he had to shoot down someone who was infected. There might be reason to believe they're running because they already got bit, and not bit. I know I don't really remember how it works on this. Like I saw that they had like that thing that comes out of their mouth, but there is reason to believe they've already been infected. He probably could have just used his judgment on it once he actually talked to them, but I can see it being like, well, you were running away from that thing and it probably got you, so better safe than sorry, regardless of if she was walking or not. Right. It would be one thing if they were walking and nothing was chasing them, but the fact that someone was chasing them, they were already bloody from the crash or the mix-up before that, which the soldier didn't get to see. I think they were doomed no matter what.
Because military in that situation is just pure containment, right?
There's
saving
no
is
judgment
not
call.
really
It's
there.
just like no.
And the one thing to point out too is like this is very interesting detail that they added in as an Easter egg, where the veteran sticker on the car that they drive, either Joel's car. So to me, like when you point out, it's like, oh, he killed her and didn't even bat an eye. I'm like, I think that's because he's veteran, like military, and he's killed people before, right? And then the way he's even recognized the soldier in front of him being like, oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Like the way he did is like, oh shit, he just got a kill order. Like he recognized what that was, right? So
to be clear, I didn't say
I think it's
he didn't
cool.
bat an eye. I didn't have any opinion on how he killed. It was more Sarah's reaction to it.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't say you said that. I was just like, oh, these are small little details that I noticed that I'm like, oh, this is great, because the game didn't have that, right? It was just like, oh, the guy was like, hold it there and shoots, and it went haywire, and they do fall. See, Sarah's dead, but like Tommy does come in and kill the guy that was there, right? So it's very, very faithfully reenacted. And one of the biggest things too is even in the game, they do that pull away from Sarah for a moment and then pull back and she's dead. Like that was a huge thing in the like, because you're just like, it's such a gut-wrenching thing in the game, and it just punches you right in the gut as one of the first things that you see, and you're like, this is not a normal game. This is a different game for sure. And all those small little details, I think the show fleshes out those kind of things even better. And I think it's great.
Yeah, I liked that he asks for help, and then Tommy's kind of like, "Come on, man, you know what's happening here.
Yep.
Don't let's not fool ourselves."
Yeah.
So yeah, then they jump. So maybe this would be important information. Not maybe, it is important information that we went from 1968, jumped to 2003. So maybe we are looking at this in like a post summer of 2020 view of everyone being on board with the ills of cops violence towards black people. I'm not saying that's when it started. I'm saying that's when it was on everyone's mind, and it was less of an argument or a debate. And in 2003, as she pointed out, like, she asked, like, hey, is this a terrorist attack? Like, so maybe she just felt comfortable in that, like, everyone assumed that the bad guys were from another country, not their country. Maybe that was the confidence she went into the house with.
And you're talking about like in the jump forward, right? With Ellie?
No, this is in 2003, like when the scene we were just talking about, where she went to see the neighbors. She might have just been it because it is during that time of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan that Bush started, like, that might be her false sense of confidence. Again, I'm well aware that police brutality didn't start in 2020 or even 2016 when it was even more talked about. I'm just saying, maybe as a American, she was under the impression of, like, well, no one's looking at me because they're all looking at the terrorists.
It's very possible.
So maybe that is the importance of that year specifically, and not just a jump forward to present day. Anyway,
I think there's also two things from the this opening scene ish that I'd like to point out too. One, in the video game, there's an Easter egg that says the infection came out of South America, out of like crops or something like that. They changed it here to be Jakarta, Indonesia. And I think this is a very, very interesting change. One, because Jakarta and Indonesia are basically the cleanest Asian countries out there, right? So you're not associating with like the racist bat eating narrative from COVID for sure. You're not doing that, and so you're associating with one of the cleanest Asian countries out there, and the level of clean is crazy in Jakarta. And you're showing that it's still the outbreak came from Jakarta and all that kind of stuff. So it's really cool that they kind of chose a developed city and that's very, very technologically advanced for this area to break out from. I think that's a wildly cool thing. Because it just goes to show, like, yeah, literally no one could have contained this. If this happened in the States, no, absolutely not. Jakarta's better equipped than that kind of stuff in the States, right? So the fact that it came from a well-prepared, idealized country, it's I think that was a great, great, great change, as opposed to being like, oh, this came from, again, like we're blaming it on China, or we're blaming it on an underdeveloped country or something like that. I think the fact that they chose Jakarta was very, very smart.
Yeah, that's a good thought I didn't even think of. So yeah, I'm glad you added that part before we moved on to the time jump to which would be for us closer to present day, because it's 2023.
In Boston.
I really liked the way they kind of got into this kid gets caught basically, and again, I think it comes down to this actress. I don't I can look her up, but the way she plays, checking his basically to see if he's sick or not, and the way she reacted to Red initially, I was like, oh, maybe Red is like, no, there's no thing. The more she talked, the more I was like, oh, she's gonna kill him. That's too bad for him. But I thought, like, she initially played it so well, of like, there looked like a bit of sign of relief on her face, like initially, of like, all right, well, what if I told you that we're just gonna get you some medicine and everything will be fine, and we'll get you your favorite food. I thought that was really well executed. I believe her name is Natasha Mumba. No, that I'm wrong about that. That's not the actress's name. Sorry, you can say what you have to say. Khadija Roberts Abdullah,
Cool.
sorry. There we go. Khadija
Yeah.
Roberts Abdullah. She was great in that scene, and she's part of Fedra, which is like uh this governing body,
Fascist
obviously.
military.
Yeah, it's a militaristic for sure
Mhm.
thing of look, it's gotten to the point where they're hanging people for even going outside of the boundaries. It's no longer
Mhm.
just rounding people up. There's public executions happening, and they're trying to stomp out the Fireflies, which is the other group. And it
Mhm.
feels like at this point, Joel and his partner Tess
Yeah.
are just trying to play the middle of this.
Mhm.
I feel like we know where they're going to end up, but like they are trying to play the middle when we see them in 2023.
Mhm.
But basically, yeah, if you had any doubts about what the fate of that kid was after he's told all that stuff, you see Joel put the kid in the fire and burn his body.
Mhm.
Because
Without, yeah, without, because
well,
the
it's a
thing
shot that
is,
matches him
yeah.
holding Sarah, but in this time there's no protection there. He just
Mhm.
drops the kid into the fire
Yeah,
because
to be,
he's numb at this point
yeah,
to
he's
that kind of
just
stuff.
comfortably numb. That's what it is. He just wants to get by. That's it.
And apparently that's where the episode was going to end, but HBO was like, you could probably go a little longer
I'm glad they
than
did
just
that.
this.
I'm so
Yeah,
glad
I
they
was
did that.
gonna say like it's a long episode. It's
Mhm.
over an hour and 20 minutes, I
Mhm.
believe, but like like it moves. I remember thinking like, oh well, the beginning scene that's only like 10 minutes, like all the
Mhm.
Sarah stuff, and then rewatching it now, I'm like that's 38 minutes actually. It's just
Oh God, yeah.
it's just an episode that moves really well.
Mhm. Mhm. It keeps you riveted, and
Yeah,
it
but
just
yeah,
goes. It's great.
so there's Fedra and the Fireflies, and their whole that's where the episode title comes from.
Mhm.
The Fireflies like to say, if you're alone in the darkness, look for
The
the
light.
light.
Mhm.
And yeah, you kind of just see Joel really, as you pointed out earlier, not really change. Like he's changed because he's lost his daughter.
Mhm.
Um, but again, he's throwing himself into work, and
Mhm.
uh, you know, that's how he gets through the day.
Mhm.
Is he'll take any job. He's constantly taking on work, and he's
Mhm.
just trying to work to disassociate, I believe.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, well, his job primarily is a smuggler in this,
Yeah.
right? He's smuggling, he's doing all that kind of stuff. And this is like one of the key points of like the video game stuff that I really, really loved is the idea where he's like, hey, I need that bag back. Like that's a very video game thing to do. It's just like, hey, that's important. I'm gonna need that back and all that kind of stuff. And then the close-ups for the kind of stuff that he grabs and all that, like that's a very video game element of this game, right? Because you're crafting bombs and all that kind of stuff. You're throwing them. That's gonna obviously come in later, but like the fact that they kind of spotlight on the bag, very cool stuff. I liked it. It was kind of like that scene in The Mandalorian, or like where he goes back to the armorer and just upgrades his stuff every single time. I'm like, I distinctly remember being like, this feels like a very video gamey thing, and I'm like, that's cool. I liked it.
Um. So and then we meet Tess, who's been beaten up and captured by Robert, I believe his name is, who she
Yep.
sold a battery to, and then he sold it to someone else.
Mhm.
I'll be honest with you, I kind of check out. I've seen this twice now. I just kind of like I don't really know what's going on. I don't really care because
Mhm.
Robert dies like immediately. So
Mhm.
it's just like this is not something I'm going to retain. I don't know if you have any more insight into this other than it's an introduction to Tess, and it
Mhm.
gives you a chance to show that she's not like your typical female lead. The
Mhm.
conversation is pretty interesting. Like the beats of it, like her being like, "Okay, fine, I'll just forget about it. What do I care? You just like you took something from me. You tried to
Mhm.
make more money. I thought, what? Who cares? Let's just let me go
It's
home.
like,
I want to
yeah.
drink so that I don't feel my face being hurt anymore." And
Mhm.
it's like it's interesting that she is captured, but at no point are you feeling like she's a victim or like someone that needs to be saved in the moment. Like
Yeah,
she seems like she's got a handle on it.
yeah, it feels like the Natasha Romanoff scene where she's doing the interrogation from the chair, like that.
Yeah.
It feels like that she's just fully in control because the entire time the Robert guy's like, but what do I do here? And then she's got the answer right away. It's just like, yeah, she's the one that's in control of the situation for sure. Nothing to add really to like, oh yeah, you scam this, you scam this, okay, oh, whatever. But it's just the idea of like, oh, in this, and I like this better. they're actually going for a car battery, which makes more sense as opposed to the guns that they were going for in the game.
Right. I've heard people mention. I don't really know
Mhm.
what that means, but I've
Mhm.
heard other people mention that.
Well, and it's very, very interesting to point this out is the idea that the violence and how it's done is very, very held back, right? Everything's just, you see the result of the violence until either the infected or Joel or Tommy is the perpetrator of the violence. Like they're the only ones that you see doing violent things on screen. And I think there's something very, very specific about that in the sense where I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, in the video game, Joel is the one primarily doing all the damage. So you would only see the damage from his perspective. Everything else would be like, yeah, we're walking into a new area and this is basically the bodies of, it's just basically this is the new map. So I'm like, I don't know if that was intentional, but I really, really do appreciate it because one of the things that even the general says, and I forget her name, but it's important to point out that she's the only one from the game that gets to reprise the actual role that she played in the game here. So good stuff for her. Yeah. It's important to point like, God, I think I kind of lost my track there. Yeah, with all the violence and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's just you see Joel being the one that oh right, this is what he says. When she said like when Ellie the handoff is like you don't know what he's capable of, like implying that yeah, Joel is the monster as well as these guys. Like they're on the same level. And that's I don't know if anyone picked that up, but I saw that and I was like, this is cool. This is really, really cool how they're making it feel like a video game by the main character being the only one that does the violent stuff, as well as Ellie, obviously, with the stabbing later on.
Oh, you mean on screen? Yeah.
Yeah,
Everyone's doing violence though.
Yeah. On screen. Specifically on screen. Yeah.
Yeah. Because and I would argue he doesn't do that like there's a lot more of showing you that people are afraid of him. Like the moment that Marlene says, you don't know what he's capable of. She says those two. So I think that Tess is involved in that as well. But there's that scene where he's like trying to look into whether or not he got communication from Tommy and he cuts the line and there's some people that are like hey and other people are kind of like just leave it like don't bother like he clearly like or when the guy is trying to recruit him and he's like if you say look for the light I'll break your jaw and the guy isn't even like trying to switch on my tactic. He's like oh yeah it's Joel bye I'm out. Like I think yeah he has some kind of reputation of being someone not to be messed with. But yeah, so before that interaction with Marlene, there is the Ellie scene where I thought basically when you watch it a second time, you realize they are monitoring her because she has been infected, but she hasn't turned the way everyone else has. So they're getting her to do this list of things that she very funnily rebels against. So they're like count to 10. They're like slowly and like purposefully, and she ends on "fuck you," which is great. She anticipates that they want her to reach her hand out, so she does that before they look up to say it. Because she's and my name is Veronica, like it was yesterday and the day before that. So like you get some sense of the time she spent there and how long they've been monitoring her. But then obviously they switch up tactics and they bring Marlene in to kind of reason with her. And you learn that Marlene actually put her in the Fedra like military school as an orphan, so she knows of her. But then I think during that interaction she gets news that like oh like yeah she's not gonna turn, like this is it, like confirmed she is part of the cure, or like she could be used to cure people. Because then I believe that's kind of what Ellie says. It's like, so is it gonna happen? And she's like, no. And she's like, so then can I leave? And she's like, no. But so again, I like the writing in the sense that they're not like explicitly telling you, but it feels like the conversation that people who have a previous history, even if it is only 3 or 4 days in this situation, would have, instead of being like, now remember, I can't let you go from when we trapped you because we've been monitoring you to see if you're gonna like, it's just, you can pick up on context clues what's happening. So I thought that was good writing and obviously good acting from the woman who plays Marlene and the woman who plays Ellie, who calls herself Veronica now. I hear that's going to be a thing later, but for now, it just seems like an alias she was using.
That's an Easter egg for sure. The one thing from the game is that Ellie and Marlene very much know each other right from the bat, right? So this is one change that, like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't, because what matters is Marlene knows that the information, like, yeah, she's immune or resistant or whatever you want to call it, right? So that's the key piece of information that Marlene and her know from the game start, and like they obviously both know this at this point in time too. So it's that doesn't change things up too much in a significant way. But what's interesting to me is the scene that happens before she even interacts with Ellie is the idea of like, they're in the planning aspect of everything where they're talking about like, oh, it's been 20 years and all we've done is like put up graffiti and all that kind of stuff. Where like, we need to do this. The thing that really weirded me out is like, okay, hold on. You're going to call out the general in front of everyone. You're going to be insubordinate in front of everyone. And then the general's not only going to allow it, but I'm going to tell you the full plan. Like, who is that person? I don't know. I didn't get any sense of like, oh, okay, they're actually like romantically involved together. And that's why it's like, okay, listen, you can't be doing this in front of other people. Like, so like nothing like that. It was weird that she just,
I don't know if that she got
laid it all out.
She just got the plan of like, hey, tonight everyone's meeting up here and we're leaving, which is information she would need to know because
that's true.
They're not leaving her behind.
That's true. Like,
you
you're right.
Have to be committing to just killing her then, because I don't think she got everything. She wouldn't even. She said, "You're not even telling me why we have that girl in particular." So she didn't get any new information other than, "Hey, surprise, we're leaving tonight."
Yeah, we're doing a mission or something like that. But it's just the idea of like, you're really not gonna discipline or say anything. And like, I like the fact he's like, your job is to follow orders. Like,
that was the discipline.
Yeah, but the idea of like, it just felt weird to me. It did a little bit.
It didn't feel weird to me. She heard her, and then she was like, "All right, now shut up and do what you're told," and then kept it moving.
Yeah, I guess a compassionate leader is like, what we're going for there. I get it.
Yeah, like I don't know what you would envision her doing, like other than anything that would tip the scales into you being like, oh, she's a dick. Look what she did to that woman who questioned her.
That is 100% true. Like anything that she would have done would have been perceived that way by me. Yeah.
I think the best thing you can do, and it's what, like, I feel like I remember everyone getting upset about Holdo and Last Jedi was like, you can talk shit all you want, but like, that's not really going to change how I operate. I'm not giving you. I feel like I've said this to you too as well. Like, if it's not actually a debate, right? Like, she even giving her the airtime to entertain like well, hear me out because this is the like, there isn't an uneven playing field, so nothing she does matters other than telling her shut up and follow the rules.
It's true.
She did that and she moved on, because otherwise you're letting it seem like there was actually room for that person to have their voice heard in that situation, and that there was some kind of transfer of power, or that she had any power in that situation, which she doesn't.
Right.
She just has a bunch of questions.
That's fair. Okay. Yeah, I see it differently now. That's good. Okay. Cool.
But yeah. So this part I also was a bit confused on, but I didn't really care, which is they were trying to track down who stole the battery. Sorry, not they. I should use names. Joel and Tess. They're trying to track down who stole the batteries from Robert. Is that correct? That's how they meet up with Marlene and not meet up, but cross paths with Marlene and Ellie. I think that's what's happening, is they're going back to like get the batteries, and then Ellie tries to do a sneak attack, which doesn't work. And then they're like, oh, Marlene, what the hell? Like, that's who he gave my batteries up to, the Che Guevara of Boston.
So yeah, the motivation right now from Joel's standpoint. I don't know why Tess is involved, but probably just because they're romantically involved in
Yeah.
this, which is I like that they make it very clear here, as opposed to in
Mhm.
the game where it's like, oh, it's alluded to. Well, I'm like, I don't appreciate that. Just make it very clear. Anyways, it's because Joel's brother hasn't been replying.
Mhm.
And that's why he's like, oh, I got to go to Missouri and I need a car battery to do it. So the confusing thing to me is like, okay, so Tess is on the mission to get the car battery and all that kind of stuff. Obviously doesn't do it and all there's complications, but it's just I don't understand why Tess was the one doing the job and how she was chained up missing and then he was just like she's not here yet. Like it's but I mean he was more concerned with drinking and
Mhm.
getting high than anything else. So I guess I just talked myself out of that.
Yeah. I meant more what were they doing like why were they out and about to get thing and that was what I was asking about was the thing like to go and retrieve the battery that she initially got that was taken from her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
To steal it back,
Yeah.
basically, or yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so they did that, but
Mm.
obviously something had happened before they got there, which I think is what you were speaking to, where a lot of violence happens off screen.
Mhm.
You're just seeing the aftermath of like Marlene being shot and people and the first actress name I said who wasn't the Fedra person, the
Mhm.
general, or sorry, not general, but like the kind of someone who probably thinks they're second in command, who clearly isn't, that had the questions earlier and who
Yeah.
now doesn't have her ear on her head. Um, so we
Yeah.
just see that aftermath. We don't know like what happened there, or I don't know what happened there. You might. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's just a slimy shootout. That's what it is. It's like, oh, we want a battery. We don't want to pay for it. Oh, cool. We're gonna kill you now.
um
That's the assumption. It's gotta be.
so then that's where we see the Ellie thing. So Joel has her knife under his foot.
Mhm.
She's upset about that, and Marlene is kind of like, look, I'm in front of two smugglers. You need to smuggle her out of here.
Mhm.
And again, she doesn't give up much information because Tess now is like, well, who is she? And she's like,
Mhm.
to you, it's just cargo. So that's that.
Mhm.
Um, and then that's when Tess brokers a deal, which I feel like how would you ever enforce that? But whatever. Like she brokers this deal of like, this is what we get if we get Ellie to where
Mhm.
you need her to get to.
Mhm.
Um, and they pretty much move on from there
Mhm.
and ultimately get into a situation like we saw at the beginning of the episode where there's a soldier, this time the soldier that we know Joel used to sell drugs to.
Mhm.
Uh, and he's like, no, I'm doing this by the book because I don't want to lose my job. And he's checking all of them to see if they're infected.
Mhm.
Ellie knows she's infected, so she stabs him. And I was kind of like, good for you.
Mhm.
I was
Mhm.
like, good. Don't let this guy take you down. Don't stand there in frozen fear. Um, and yeah, basically Joel has his breaking point of like, or I guess I feel like people have interpreted it as a breaking point. But what I feel like is like you said, he's clearly someone people are scared of, so he probably has shown that he could do that in the past,
Mhm.
like in the past 20 years, I should say.
Mhm.
But we're seeing it for the first time. So it's new
Yep.
to us, but completely understandable
Mhm.
that he would go even further this time and kill the person with his fist because he's seeing himself completely in that situation of a girl he needs to protect. Uh, and I do mean Ellie in this situation. I'm not saying Tess is a girl; she's a full
Mhm.
grown woman. But
Mhm.
for the Ellie thing, it's a girl he needs to protect, like he wanted to protect his daughter.
Mhm.
And he's like, nope, not happening again. And I
Mhm.
was not happy he beat the guy to death, but I was happy that he took action this time. I was like,
Mhm.
that good for you. Um, and the fallout of that is obviously Tess sees, hey, she was infected, and basically being Ellie having the good point of look at the scarring on me. Like I wouldn't
Mhm.
have survived with the scarring if I
Yeah.
was someone that was going to turn. Like
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Mhm.
And I
Which
feel like
is
that's what the pieces come together for Joel of like, I see what the cargo is now.
that is 100%. And that's right from the game, right? It's like in the game there's a lot more guards. There's like 3 guards that like get them to do that the exact same reenactment, not just 1 guard. So I like the escape from this. It makes it a lot more credible, because in the game it's just like, okay, Ellie does the stab, and then Joel and Tess like immediately do the bang bang, and they get
Hmm.
out of it, right? And then they're like, oh, like look at the scanner, it's red. And yeah, she's like, well, it's been 3 weeks, I have this bite and all this kind of stuff. So like it is there that they reveal it all, and I think they did it really, really good. And here's here's the incredible detail that I love. The first time you take Ellie outside of the quarantine zone in the game, she actually go like in the background of like just chatter dialogue, she goes like, holy shit, I'm actually outside right now. And
Hmm.
like the fact that they gave credence to that, and I'm like, this is awesome. This is
Yeah, I think
so awesome.
Ellie is such a great character. I mean, honestly, there isn't a character I don't like.
Mhm.
I think, well, I mean, there's some characters that are annoying, but I think everyone is fleshed out very well.
Mhm.
Um, which I think is cool. Like that I know you kind of you've not hinted at you touched on what makes this a successful adaptation. Um, and I feel like you've said this in the past too, and I also say this, which is it's a hard proposition to adapt a video game in particular, because
Mhm.
more so than a book, you are actually able to manipulate the way things go. So you're already removing that for people. And yeah, stuff like the truck scene, you can move your camera around while playing that, but it is pretty much on rails for that in the video game. That's what I
Yes.
remember. So
Mhm.
you are already predisposed to just sitting and watching the visuals, so that might
Mhm.
help them. But I do think a bigger thing is that it is a show that's taking its time from us getting an hour and 20-minute long episode, and the
Mhm.
third episode is also over an hour long. Like it's not a show that's like rushing to the end. It
Mhm.
is a show that is actually taking its time, so that a character like Sarah, who we might get flashbacks of, but in the video game obviously has a lot less time to develop as a character,
Mhm.
gets to develop as a character
Yeah.
in this. Or even the fact that I felt something for that Fedra agent who clearly was on like a ride, even if this is like the 1,000th time she's done this. I
Mhm.
hope not, but even if it was the 1,000th time, she'd have to tell a kid that basically like, you're don't worry, we won't do anything to you. That
Mhm.
you can see it on her face that like, even though I was tricked initially, that as it went on, it was very clear from her voice and her face, like, this sucks. That what we're gonna do is gonna suck.
Mhm.
And like, I feel like it even starts before that. Like the second time watching it, seeing her be like, "Oh yeah, you're strapped in because we don't want you to fall." Like even like kid probably knows I'm not gonna fall, but it's just like
Right.
stuff like just little touches like that that like I don't remember that being a big thing from the game, if it is in the game at all. But like most characters, even the person who's fixing her watch, the
Mhm.
idea that like they have a life going on and they have wants and needs, like that person fixing the watch is like so proud of the work he can do. When then I guess that's like his daughter or some family member being like, "We're shutting down, stop." He doesn't even have time to finish, and he's like, "I did finish." Like they're not on screen for a long time, but the show took the care to like
Mhm.
develop them in what
Yes.
little time they had, so that everything feels like you're taking your time and really
Mhm.
getting to experience these characters. And I think that's probably what will ultimately make it a good adaptation, is
Mhm.
that it's not trying to rush anything. So even the video game stuff that you've rightfully been pointing out throughout, it feels like it's supposed to be there, and it just feels like part of it, as
Mhm.
opposed to them being like, now we're going to show you that thing you like from the video game, or now we're going to do it. It's like,
Mhm.
no, this is all coming together and we're taking our time with this.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It's not like you're waiting for the Doom gimmick to drop where you're like,
Hmm.
oh, like, and that's why I brought up the idea of gimmicks in video game movies, because that's what it is. I thought long and hard about this, like why previous video game movies have never done well, and this is going to do very, very well. Is the idea
Well,
of like A, the cinematic aspect of it, but B, the biggest thing about video games movies prior to this is that they were going off deep dive lore stuff, right? So they're writing a movie based on lore entry in the video game, which is canon. It's good, But the challenge with that is like when you take, especially when we have the Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64 era video games and all that kind of stuff, when you try to take lore and build that into a story, it doesn't work. It just really, really doesn't. Because now you're taking a cool part of the game and you're focusing on that versus like what other people liked about the game. And it's a weird kind of concept, right? So you either make a really good movie that's inspired by the game, but you don't have a good adaptation until now. I would say The
this isn't a
Witcher.
movie, so I don't think it's an apples to apples thing. So
right.
I don't know how much that applies because it's a TV show. It's not a movie.
Right. So
and a movie gives you time constraints, and that's what we're talking about, right? The fact that this isn't rushing anything.
True. Because Druckmann
like that it can have episodes that are typically longer than even TV shows get. Like in every essence of the word, they get to take their time. Like it's not just like, oh, they get an hour instead of they get 9 hours instead of the 2 hours that this movie would have been, or 2.5 hours this movie would have been. They get more than 9 hours because some of these episodes are longer than just an hour and 5 minutes. Like this is like an hour and 22, hour and 26 minutes. There's going to be another hour and 15-minute episode. Like they're getting more time. And
yes,
we can always agree that when you are able to take your time there, you feel more immersed in the situation, right?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, and I don't know that I can fully go like on your train of thought of when we're talking about movies, because I think ultimately they don't ever have enough time.
Yeah, it's true.
And this has the time. And the other big thing, which I think is a more important factor, which is what, like, I play video games just to like find out what the story is. You don't play like that, right? Like not a lot of people who identify as gamers play that way. So then the proposition of a movie is already taking them out of it, because that is about the story and less about experiencing it and being able to create your own experience. Well, we did it. We got through the first episode of The Last of Us. Thank you very much for listening. Obviously, we do our ratings at the end of the season. We're not going to rate each episode individually, but maybe we can see if each episode was enough for us to want to keep watching. Maybe we'll keep doing that at the beginning of each of these spoiler reviews. But this was a very successful pilot. And thank you very much for listening. We're part of the That Shelf Podcast Network with other great shows like Bad Game Movies, Black Hole Films, Contra Zoom. Sorry about that. Yeah, they're a great show. So please listen to those shows and our show and more shows by going to thatshelf.com. If you want to hear older episodes of our show, please go to tdfeverything.com/spoiledrotten. Our email is spoiledpodcast@gmail.com. We have Twitter and Instagram. They're both at TDFSpoiled. And we're on all the podcast platforms: Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Radio Public, Apple Podcasts. So please go rate, review, subscribe, follow, and share with your friends. And we will be back next week with episode 2. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
This has been a TDF Everything production, brah.